I didn't flinch when my brother looked at me from across the courtroom and smiled. It was the kind of smile that said he had already won. Slow. Deliberate. The same smile he gave me at my father's funeral when he leaned in and whispered, "Dad would have wanted me to handle everything." I had let it go that day because I was standing over my father's casket, and my knees could barely hold me up. I was not going to let it go today. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic person. I don't make scenes. I don't post things on social media when I'm angry. I'm a 38-year-old woman who works as a hospital billing coordinator, raises 2 kids mostly on her own, and drives a 2017 Honda that needs new brakes. I am not the kind of person things like this happen to. Or at least, I didn't used to think so. My father passed away 14 months before that courtroom day. He was 67 years old, and he died of a heart attack on a Tuesday morning while he was drinking his coffee and reading the news on his tablet. My mother had passed 6 years earlier, so it was just the 3 of us left me, my brother, and my younger sister. My brother is 42, my sister is 34. And the 3 of us had not sat in the same room without tension since the year my mother got sick. My father was not a wealthy man by any standard, but he had worked hard his entire life. He had a small house in Columbus, Ohio, fully paid off. He had a savings account, a modest investment account, and a life insurance policy. When you added it all together, it came to just over $400,000. Not generational wealth, but enough to matter. Enough to change things for people like us, who were not struggling exactly, but who were always one unexpected bill away from a difficult month. 3 weeks after the funeral, my brother called me. He said my father had updated his will. He said my father had decided, in the last year of his life, to leave the house and the majority of the estate to him. He said there was a document. He said a lawyer had already filed it. I didn't believe him. Not because I needed the money more than he did, and not because I thought I deserved it more. I didn't believe him because 6 weeks before my father died, I had sat with my father at his kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, and he had shown me his will on his laptop. He had walked me through every line. He had divided everything 3 equal ways, 1/3 to me, 1/3 to my brother, 1/3 to my sister. He had smiled when he closed the laptop and said, "I don't want you kids fighting when I'm gone. I've seen what that does to families." My father would not have changed that will. I knew it in the way you know things about a person you have loved your entire life, but a document existed. It had been filed with the probate court. It bore my father's signature. And according to my brother's attorney, it was entirely valid. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Patricia, and she was straightforward with me from the beginning. She told me that contesting a will was expensive, time-consuming, and difficult to win. She told me that the burden of proof was on me. She told me that if the signature was verified, I was going to have a very hard road ahead. I told her I understood. I told her to proceed. What followed was 11 months of the most exhausting experience of my life. There were depositions, there were document requests. There were court dates that got postponed and then postponed again. There were legal fees that slowly drained the small savings account I had built over 15 years of careful spending. My brother had money. His wife came from a family with money. They had a team of attorneys. I had Patricia, who was good at her job but who was very clearly outgunned. My sister, for her part, had sided with my brother. I don't fully understand why, even now. Maybe she believed him. Maybe she thought she would get something out of it. She had stopped returning my calls by the 4th month of the process. When I saw her at a family event, she looked past me like I wasn't there. The specific document my brother had filed claimed that my father had updated his will 18 months before his death. It named my brother as the primary beneficiary and executor of the estate. It was signed, dated, and notarized. The notarization was from a man named Gerald Webb, a notary public whose license was valid and current. When Patricia's office contacted Mr. Webb, he confirmed that he had notarized a document for my father. He remembered the appointment. He remembered my father being present. That is when I started to feel genuinely afraid. Not for myself, exactly, for the truth. Because the truth was starting to feel like something that could be buried. Patricia brought in a forensic document examiner named Dr. Reyes, a woman who had spent 20 years analyzing questioned documents for courts and law enforcement. Dr. Reyes examined the signature on the updated will against signatures from my father's other documents, his tax returns, his bank records, letters he had written. She identified what she called significant inconsistencies in pen pressure and stroke termination. She believed the signature was not authentic. She could testify to that. But my brother's team had their own expert. Their expert said the signature was genuine. Two experts, two opposite conclusions, and a judge who would have to decide which one to believe. The morning of the final hearing, I drove to the courthouse alone. My kids were at school. Patricia met me outside the entrance and went over everything one more time. She was calm, the way lawyers are trained to be calm when they are walking into a situation they are not certain they can win. I appreciated her for that. I also appreciated that she was honest with me. "We have a strong argument," she said, "but I want you prepared for any outcome." I nodded. I was as prepared as I was going to be. The courtroom was small. My brother was already seated at the table across from us when I walked in. His wife sat in the gallery behind him, along with two people I didn't recognize who were dressed in expensive clothes. His lead attorney was a man named Douglas Hale who had silver hair and a practiced calm that reminded me of every person I had ever met who had never been truly worried about anything in their life. My brother did not look at me when I came in. He was looking down at some papers in front of him. But when I sat down and the room settled, he turned, and that was when he smiled. I looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then I turned and faced the front. The judge's name was the Honorable Margaret Chen. She was in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a no-nonsense manner that I found comforting. She had reviewed the briefs. She was ready to proceed. The first hour was technical. Douglas Hale presented the case for the will's validity. He walked through the notarization, the timeline, my father's alleged meetings with their estate attorney in the months before the will was drafted. He called the estate attorney to the stand, a man named Phil Mercer, who testified that he had met with my father twice, that my father had been clear and competent, that my father had expressed a clear desire to restructure his estate in favor of my brother, who had, according to Phil Mercer, provided significant financial support to my father in his final years. That last part was not true. I knew it wasn't true because I was the one who had helped my father with his bills when he had a slow year on the small landscaping contracts he still picked up in his retirement. I had the bank transfers to prove it. Patricia had submitted them. When it was our turn, Patricia called Dr. Reyes. Dr. Reyes was composed and specific on the stand. She explained her methodology. She pointed to the inconsistencies she had found, showing enlarged images of signature strokes on the screen at the front of the courtroom. She was credible. She was thorough. Douglas Hale's cross-examination was aggressive. He challenged her credentials, her methodology, her prior testimony in cases where her conclusions had been disputed. Dr. Reyes held up well, but I could see that the judge was absorbing everything carefully, not showing her hand. Then Patricia called me. I had practiced with Patricia for 3 sessions. I knew what she was going to ask. I knew what I was going to say. But sitting in that chair, in that room, with my brother watching me from 12 feet away, every prepared answer in my head felt thin. Patricia asked me about the Sunday afternoon at my father's kitchen table. I described it. The laptop, the will on the screen, the coffee cups, the afternoon light coming through the window over the sink. I described it the way I remembered it because those kinds of afternoons with your father, the ordinary ones, the ones where nothing dramatic happens but something quiet passes between you, you remember them exactly. Douglas Hale's cross-examination lasted 40 minutes. He suggested that my memory was unreliable. He suggested that my father may have shown me an older version of the will. He suggested that I was a grieving daughter who was struggling to accept that her father had made choices she didn't agree with. He said the word grieving with a kind of practiced softness that made me feel like I was being handled. "Isn't it possible," he said, standing very close to the witness box, "that you simply misunderstood what you were looking at that afternoon?" "No," I said. "It's not possible." He smiled a little. The kind of smile that says, your certainty is itself a form of naivety. I stepped down and went back to my seat. Patricia leaned over and told me I had done well. I didn't ask her if she meant it. We were moving toward closing arguments. I could feel the weight of the room shifting in a way I couldn't name but could feel in my chest. The judge was reviewing something on her desk. Douglas Hale was straightening his notes. My brother had his arms crossed and was looking at the ceiling with the body language of a man who is waiting for something he already knows is coming. And then the door at the back of the courtroom opened. I didn't turn around immediately. Doors open in courtrooms. It wasn't unusual, but Patricia turned. And when she turned back to face forward, something in her expression had changed in a way I had never seen in 11 months of working with her. The clerk walked a note to Judge Chen. The judge read it. She looked up over her reading glasses at the back of the room. Then she looked at both tables and said, "I've been notified that we have a witness requesting to address the court. This is unusual at this stage, but given the nature of what has been represented to me, I'm going to allow it. Counsel." Approach. Both Patricia and Douglas Hale went to the bench. I could hear the low murmur of their voices, but not the words. Douglas Hale straightened up and said something that sounded like an objection. The judge shook her head. Both attorneys returned to their tables. Patricia sat down beside me and said quietly, "There's a man named Raymond Kowalski. He drove here this morning from Pittsburgh. He says he was a business partner of your father's 15 years ago. He says he has documentation. I didn't know anyone named Raymond Kowalski." He walked to the front of the courtroom in a charcoal gray suit that was slightly too large for him, like a suit he kept for occasions that didn't come around often. He was in his late 60s, with white hair and a careful way of moving that suggested someone who had learned to be deliberate. He was sworn in. Patricia conducted the examination because she had spoken with him briefly in the hallway, and the judge had given her 15 minutes to prepare. Raymond Kowalski explained that he and my father had been partners in a small landscaping supply business from 1998 to 2007. The business had dissolved amicably. They had stayed in contact over the years, exchanging calls on holidays and birthdays. He said my father had called him 3 months before he died. Patricia asked him what my father had said during that call. Raymond said my father had been troubled. He said my father had told him that my brother had approached him about changing his will, that my brother had told my father he needed financial help, that he had debts he hadn't disclosed to his wife, and that he needed the estate to be restructured in his favor. Raymond said my father had refused. He said my father had told my brother directly that the will was not going to change. Douglas Hale objected. Hearsay. Judge Chen considered it and partially sustained the objection. She instructed the jury there was no jury. It was just the judge. But she directed her ruling at the record that the testimony about the content of the call would be considered for context only. But Raymond Kowalski was not finished. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit and removed a folded envelope. He said that after that phone call, my father had mailed him something. He said my father had told him on the phone that he was sending it because he wanted someone outside the family to have it, someone he trusted. Inside the envelope was a letter, 2 pages, handwritten, dated approximately 10 weeks before my father's death. Patricia read it into the record with the judge's permission. My father had written, in his own handwriting, that he was concerned his son was planning to misuse his estate after his death. He had written that he had been approached and had refused to change his will. He had written that his current will, dividing everything equally among his 3 children, was his true and final intention. He had written that if anything appeared to contradict this after he was gone, it was not his doing. At the bottom of the letter, my father had signed his name, and below his signature, he had written one additional line. He had written the name and phone number of Gerald Webb, the notary. My father had written, "Gerald Webb is an honest man. If you need to talk to him, he will tell you what he knows." The courtroom was very quiet. Patricia asked Raymond why he had not come forward earlier. He said he had not known there was a contest. He said he lived alone and didn't follow news he wasn't connected to. He said his son had seen something on a local legal notice board online and had recognized the name and told him. He said he had gotten in his car the same morning and driven 3 hours. Douglas Hale's cross-examination was brief. He challenged the letter's authenticity. He suggested it could have been fabricated. He asked Raymond how anyone could verify the letter was genuine. Raymond Kowalski reached back into the envelope and removed a second document. It was a notarization. My father, it turned out, had also mailed himself a notarized copy of the same letter, postmarked and sealed, which Raymond had picked up from my father's post office box after his death, using a key my father had given him years ago for exactly this kind of situation. The notarization was dated. The notary seal was from a different notary than Gerald Webb, an independent notary in a town 30 miles from Columbus. Douglas Hale looked at the document for a long time. Then he looked at my brother. My brother was no longer looking at the ceiling. Judge Chen asked for both documents to be submitted as exhibits. She asked if Gerald Webb was available to be contacted. Patricia said she could have him on the phone within the hour. The judge called a 90-minute recess. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench outside the courtroom and didn't speak for a long time. Raymond Kowalski sat a few feet away, and at some point I turned and looked at him and said, "Why did my father trust you with this?" He thought about it. Then he said, "Because I was the only person in his life who had nothing to gain from any of it." When court resumed, Gerald Webb had been reached by phone. He was placed on speaker with both attorneys present. Judge Chen questioned him directly. Gerald Webb said that he had notarized a document for my father. Yes. He said a man had come to his office, presented identification, and he had notarized a will. He said the man had been polite, and the appointment had been routine. Judge Chen asked him to describe the man. Gerald Webb described a man who was approximately 40 years old, medium build, dark hair. My father, at the time this document was supposedly notarized, had been 66 years old with white hair and had walked with a cane due to a knee injury. The silence that followed was the kind that takes up all the air in the room. Judge Chen thanked Mr. Webb and ended the call. She looked at Douglas Hale for a long moment. Then she looked at my brother. She said, "Mr. Hale, I'm going to ask you to advise your client very carefully about what happens next. Because what I am hearing today suggests that this court may have been presented with fraudulent documentation, which is a matter I am prepared to refer to the district attorney's office. I am also prepared to appoint a forensic accountant to review the notarization records associated with the contested will. In the meantime, I am staying all distribution of the estate." Douglas Hale said something quiet to my brother. My brother said something back. His voice was low, but the room was small. I heard him say, "That is not what we agreed to." His wife, behind him in the gallery, got up and walked out. The hearing ended without closing arguments. The judge dismissed everyone with instructions that all parties were to remain available for further proceedings. In the hallway, Patricia stood with me for a moment before she went to gather her things. She said, "I want you to know that I did not see that coming." I said, "Neither did I." Raymond Kowalski shook my hand before he left. He said my father had talked about me sometimes during their phone calls over the years. He said my father had been proud of me. I thanked him. I stood in the hallway until I heard the elevator close behind him. My brother walked out of the courtroom with his attorney 10 minutes later. He did not look at me. He walked past me like I wasn't there, the same way my sister had done at the family event months ago. The difference was that this time, I was not invisible. I was just something he could no longer afford to acknowledge. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for a while before I went inside. The brakes made the noise they always made when I stopped. I needed to get those fixed. The formal ruling came 6 weeks later. Judge Chen found the contested will to be invalid based on a preponderance of evidence of fraud. The original will, the one my father had shown me on his laptop, the one with 3 equal shares, was reinstated as the controlling document. The matter was referred to the county prosecutor's office for further investigation. My brother's attorney contacted Patricia 3 weeks after the ruling and said that my brother wished to reach a settlement rather than face criminal proceedings. I will not share the details of what was settled because some of it is still ongoing. What I will tell you is that the estate was distributed according to my father's true wishes. My sister received her share. I received mine. My brother received his, minus certain costs that I'll leave to your imagination. I called my sister when it was over. She didn't answer the first time. She called back 2 days later. "We talked for a long time," she cried. I didn't, because I had done my crying at different moments over the past 14 months, mostly in my car and parking lots when I thought no one could see me. What she told me was that she had known something was wrong but had been too afraid to say so. I understood that. Fear makes people do things they spend a long time trying to forgive themselves for afterward. We are in a different place now, my sister and I. Not where we were before all of this, but somewhere, working towards something. My father's house was sold 4 months after the ruling. The night before the closing, I drove there by myself and sat in his driveway for an hour. I didn't go inside. I just sat there, in the dark, with the engine off, looking at the house where I had grown up. The window over the kitchen sink was lit up from the inside, from the lights the realtor had set on timers. It looked exactly the way it had looked on Sunday afternoons when I was a child, and we were all inside, and it was warm, and there was nowhere else any of us needed to be. My father had known someone might try to take what he'd built. He had known it, and he had done the quiet, careful, ordinary thing he always did, which was to plan ahead without making a fuss. He had found the one person with nothing to gain, handed him an envelope, and trusted that the truth would be enough. It was. It is always enough if someone is willing to carry it far enough. I drove home and helped my kids with their homework and made dinner and did not say anything about any of it because they were too young to understand most of it, and also because some things you carry yourself for a while before you share them. But that night, after they were asleep, I sat at my kitchen table the way my father used to sit at his, and I thought about him, and I was glad. Not glad in the easy way, the way you feel glad when something small goes right. Glad in the way that settles in your bones and stays there. The kind of glad that knows it came from somewhere real. My father had raised me to be the kind of person who drives 3 hours when it matters. He had raised me to keep documents. To tell the truth in rooms where lying would have been easier. To look straight ahead when someone across from you is smiling because they think they've already won. He had raised me to wait. And I had.